Thank you so much for joining us for day 2 of the AfDB Development Evaluation Week. My name is Christine. I'm going to be the MC for the morning session. So for the colleagues and participants who are online, I would like to let you know that we have interpretation services, so you can select either English or French. If you want to ask a question, you can just type it in the chat, and somebody is going to hand it to the moderator so that it can be responded to. The people in the room, you will raise your hand and you'll get a microphone to ask your questions. So without further ado, because we are running slightly behind schedule, I'd like to invite our moderator for today, Dr. Jemima Njuki. Jemima, welcome.
Good morning, dear colleagues, distinguished panelists and participants. Welcome to this second day of Evaluation Week. And today we will be discussing how Africa can harness its demographic dividend through people-centered regional integration. I wanted to start the session with a very simple but powerful reality that we hear all the time, that Africa is the youngest region in the world. Nearly 60% of our population is under the age of 25. And today, the continent is home to over 500 million young people. And every year, between 10 and 20 million of these young people enter the labor market. This is a tremendous asset, but it is also a growing pressure for the continent, because while the labor force expands rapidly, job creation has not always kept in pace. About 3 million formal jobs are created each year, far below the number of young people that are entering the workforce. And an estimated 1 in 5 young people is not in employment, education, or training. And these numbers are even lower for young women as they face bigger struggles in the school-to-work transition. Even among those that we know are working, a majority of them are in insecure, informal employment, often with low productivity and limited protections. So when we speak about a demographic dividend, we must be very clear that this dividend is not automatic. It must be created through deliberate policy choices and coordinated investments. And this brings us to the central question of this morning's discussion. How do we transform this demographic growth into productive jobs, stronger economies, and inclusive growth at scale, and growth that benefits everyone? Across the continent, we are already investing in many of the right building blocks, expanding skills development and vocational training, including digital skills for hundreds of thousands of youth, supporting youth-led and women-led enterprises with increasing attention to access to finance, strengthening digital platforms and innovation ecosystems to connect people to jobs and markets, and many other strategic investments. And yet, the evidence, including from our own evaluations, says something important, that these efforts are often fragmented, they're national, and they are insufficiently linked to regional markets and value chains. And this is where regional integration becomes critical, not just as a trade agenda, but also as a jobs and productivity agenda. If it works well, regional integration can enable young people to access opportunities beyond national borders. It can support alignment of skills with regional demand. It can expand access to markets for SMEs. It can drive regional value chains that create jobs at scale. But if it is not people-centered, it risks reinforcing existing inequalities, particularly for young women, informal workers, and small enterprises. Let me make this a little bit more concrete. Across Africa, millions of women and young people are engaged in small-scale cross-border trade, often in food and essential goods. This is not a marginal activity. It is the backbone of regional economies. Yet many of these traders face limited access to finance, informal and sometimes unsafe trading conditions, weak access to digital tools, and very few pathways to scale their businesses. And what we are seeing from emerging evidence and programs is that when we take a systemic and integrated approach, the results can be transformative. Even from our own bank initiatives, we see what works is when these initiatives address multiple constraints and constraints at multiple levels at once: skills, finance, infrastructure, and policy. And that is exactly the kind of integrated evidence-informed decision-making that we need to scale. So let me frame the three questions that will guide our discussions this morning. First, what does the evidence tell us about which combinations of interventions actually create jobs and productivity at scale, especially for young people? Second, where are we still falling short? Is it labor mobility? Is it skills recognition? Is it access to finance? Is it gender equality? And why? And third, and most importantly, is what must we change to ensure that young people, women, SMEs, and informal workers are not just participants, but real drivers of the change that we seek. Because ultimately, if we get this right, Africa's young population will become the engine of growth, innovation, and prosperity, locally and globally. But if we do not get it right, we risk a widening gap between opportunity and reality for millions of young people. We also risk widening other inequalities, including gender inequalities. I'm very much looking forward to a rich and practical discussion on how we can move from evidence to impact, on how we can move from fragmented investments to coordinated, systemic, and transformational investments. We have an excellent lineup of speakers this morning, and I would like to first welcome Dr. Tapera Muzira, who's the lead expert on human capital, youth and skills development, and regional sector manager for West Africa and Nigeria for the AfDB department here in the bank. Dr. Tapera will be representing Dr. Martha Phiri, the director, who unfortunately could not be with us this morning. As you know, we are grappling with an Ebola outbreak. She also oversees our health portfolio, and she's currently handling some of the bank's discussions around managing that Ebola outbreak. So thank you very much, and welcome, Dr. Muzira.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Please allow me to stand on existing protocols and address the House at large. So, distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let me start from where the moderator left off, just to give you a little bit more on the context. Africa is experiencing a population growth of about 2.3%, which is roughly 2 to 3 times the global average. In absolute terms, we are adding about 35 million people per year, and we will reach about 2.5 billion by 2050. The median age in Africa right now is about 19.5 years. You can compare that with the rest of the world, which is on average 30 years. And hence the population structure that we have is characterized by a youth bulge. So what does that actually mean? As the moderator was saying, the demographic window of opportunity actually refers to a stage of the demographic transition where during which the working age population comprises a particularly large share of the population. And this is where we are. And that's why you have this discussion on demographic dividend. So with a relatively large working age population, it is easier for societies in Africa to make the necessary investments in human and physical capital to boost both the living standards and economic development. And so this is the discussion that we have this morning. So how do we do that? That's the question that has been asked. So as the moderator said, there are more than 60% of the African population is roughly under the age of 25. And by 2050, we project that the youth population will be around 830 million. So this position makes the continent a primary driver of future global labor force growth, presenting an opportunity to accelerate economic growth, productivity, innovation, and global competitiveness. In short, our young people are an asset. They are not really a problem. So where's the challenge? The first challenge, as the moderator said, is that our economies are not creating enough jobs. If you look at most of our African countries, the employment elasticities of growth remain below 1, and they vary across our sectors, reflecting an economic growth pattern with limited absorbing capacity. So most of the growth that we've been reporting has actually been jobless. It's been driven by extractive industries, etc., and with very little labor absorbing capacity. In 2015, a lot of people quote this statistic that out of 12 million young Africans entering the workforce every single year, only 3 million managed to secure formal employment. We modeled this statistic in 2015, about 10 years ago. So the situation is likely to be much worse today. This was done by the bank and Dalbeck in 2015, so more than 10 years ago. And at that point, almost 8 out of 10 young Africans were entering the labor market, ending up underemployed in the informal economy, earning below the living wage, and often with no social protection. But in 2019, we published a policy document on creating decent jobs, in which, again, we modeled that the labor force for the continent will grow by about 1 billion between 2016 and 2063, and that, therefore, the continent will need to create 1.7 million jobs a month, or roughly 20.4 million jobs a year, assuming the labor participation and unemployment rates would remain constant. But of course, they've not remained constant since then, since 2019. And considering also the subsequent pandemics, effects of wars, geopolitical crisis, since then, obviously the unemployment situation is even worse than that. So we definitely need to create much more than the 1.7 million jobs a month that we projected in 2019. The second problem is that we have a chronic skills mismatch and gap between our training graduates and the labor market. So on one hand, we have a problem that our private sector is very small, is mainly extractive, it's not creating sufficient number of formal jobs for young people entering the market. But on the other hand, we also have a problem where the skills that they are gaining from our training institutions are not aligned to the labor market. So even for the few jobs that are available, we actually don't have people who are qualified to access those jobs. And the statistics are available to say this. 46% of employed youth perceive their occupations are not related to the fields of study. 35% of them believe their current skills will not remain relevant over the next 3 years. Graduate unemployment in Africa right now is a very critical issue, with rates often exceeding 20 to 30% in several countries. And the situation is far worse for those graduating at college and high school level. And if you speak to employers, for instance, recently with the World Economic Forum, over 60% of employers in major economic hubs such as South Africa identify persistent skills gaps as a direct threat to business transformation. So we really have a challenge where the skills that our young people are gaining from training institutions are not very much aligned to what private sector is looking for. So that means that the demographic advantage that we have is we cannot translate it into prosperity if we don't address these major two bottlenecks. So the key question we are asking ourselves today is, what is it we can do to ensure that Africa translates that demographic advantage into a demographic dividend? And so the human capital development must remain at the center of our national and regional strategies. And to unlock this, young people must be supported to acquire skills, access to productive employment opportunities, to establish their own businesses that contribute to economic transformation. And we need to focus on evidence-based pathways where we can ensure that this demographic transition becomes one of Africa's most powerful instruments for shared prosperity. Here at the bank, we've been putting young people at the center of what we do. Our 10-year strategy considers young people as a cross-cutting investment priority. Our cardinal point 3, harnessing demographic transformation for economic development, also puts this emphasis, putting young people at the center. But however, to operationalize these strategic commitments, we've been implementing the Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy. We've been implementing the Skills for Employability and Productivity in Africa Action Plan. And to date, our results from these efforts are quite considerable. For instance, between 2016 and 2024, we approved over 1,000 operations, investing over $43 billion, and adding an additional $62 billion from external partners through co-financing. Our investments are expected to create 25.4 million jobs, consisting 7.4 million direct and 18 million indirect jobs, with a strong focus on inclusion for women and young people. Just our skills action plan alone we made an investment of over $1.3 billion, leveraged almost $2 billion from co-financing partners, and also 3.4 billion from counterpart funding through our regional members. And to date, close to 680,000 young people have benefited from this action plan. But however, a lot more needs to be done. This means we need to do more investments together. The bank alone cannot do this on its own. So we need to make sure that countries and also the private sector are enabling young people to access employment, not just in their own country, but across borders, and also helping them as entrepreneurs to expand into regional markets and allowing businesses to participate fully in regional value chains. So let me draw on a couple of examples from the bank's experience. So first, because the population is increasing, the youth birth is growing, the situation on unemployment is likely to become worse, so is the issue of skills mismatch. We really need to move with speed, scale, and impact. That is why at the bank we have institutionalized what we call the Youth Skills and Jobs Marker System, which ensures that every operation deliberately and systematically generates employment for young people. I must say the Africa Development Bank is actually the first among the MDBs to really have this deliberate action. So what that means, if you take a moment to think about it, is the roads, the energy, the water systems, the transport corridors, the industrial zones, digital connectivity investments across the African continent that we do. We have often viewed these investments in terms of productivity, trade, and regional integration alone, but actually we can leverage on these investments to create jobs. So the application of the Youth Skills and Jobs Marker System helps us to view these infrastructure investments with complementarity lens, in fact, from a demographic dividend perspective. We want these investments to create jobs, to build skills, to expand economic opportunity throughout their life cycle, from construction to maintenance, as avenues to support youth-led micro and small and medium enterprise development. The second thing that we also need to do is to approach skills development and job creation through a private sector-led ecosystem approach. And this is very important. So for example, in Nigeria, we are financing the Digital and Creative Enterprises Program, which works with the private sector fund managers to target Nigerians aged 15 to 35 years who are involved in innovative, early-stage, technology-enabled startups and in creative enterprises. This program is aligning training institutions to the needs of the labor market, supporting the establishment of innovation centers of excellence and digital satellite labs in 12 universities and polytechnics in Nigeria. And this is operationalized through public-private partnerships that are linked to the private sector managers for investment. With this program, 226 creative enterprises, 451 digital technology startups will benefit from the financing and business development services that are curated by the fund managers and the private sector. So this is just one example of what investments can do. From the IDEV program, we're expecting to create more than 6 million jobs, actually, especially for young people, and equip more than 175,000 young people with skills and digital technology. The second point I want to also put on the table is the issue of promoting regional labor mobility. Now, regional integration delivers at its greatest benefits only when people can move freely to where opportunities exist. Labor mobility currently remains constrained by fragmented systems, limited recognition of qualifications, and several administrative barriers. So, for example, a skilled worker trained in one African country today may face difficulties in proving their qualifications and securing employment in another country, just one border away, representing a wasted opportunity for the continent. So initiatives such as Africa Skills Passport are actually designed to open these doors. So by creating pathways for African talent to thrive within the continent and ensuring that skills are recognized across the borders, we are finally breaking down the barriers that hold our labor force back. And these initiatives help us to move talent where it is needed most, connecting Africans to real opportunities right across the continent. So for instance, in Angola, we are partnering with the European Union to invest close to $125 million to help the country strengthen women and youth-led SMEs and startups, particularly in the tourism sector, in the agricultural sector, and transport value chains, so as to take full advantage of the transnational opportunities created along the Lobito corridor, a strategic rail and logistic network connecting Angola's Atlantic coast to the mineral-rich regions of DRC and Zambia. So you can see this is also one of the ways in which we can leverage that. From that investment alone, we are establishing 11 digital innovation hubs to promote entrepreneurship and innovation in agriculture and transport value chains. We are equipping nearly 100,000 young people with digital entrepreneurship and demand-driven skills. We're supporting 10,000 early-stage startups for young women and men with training, access to finance, and linkages to markets to ultimately create more than 37,000 direct jobs. So part of our support also is working with regional economic commissions, such as EAC and ECOWAS, to harmonize curriculum and qualifications across the region so as to facilitate labor mobility. So we have currently invested actually $75 million in the East Africa's Centers of Excellence in Biomedical Sciences to strengthen the regional skills development, specialized healthcare delivery, and labor mobility across East Africa. So it can be done. In Kenya, Centers of Excellence, also in Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania, have been somewhat supported to harmonize postgraduate biomedical curriculum, regional accreditation systems, and common admission frameworks. So you can see from some of these examples that it is actually quite possible to do this. Also, in partnership with the African Union, we have invested more than $30 million in the Pan-African University, an institution strategically positioned to drive high-level skills development and labor mobility across the continent. The success of the phase one has laid a powerful foundation for phase two, offering 21 Master of Science, 12 PhD program, and several graduates, over 2,000 of them, including women from 41 African countries who have now gained critical STEM skills. We are now on phase two for this program, and the new phase prioritizes international accreditation for institutions that are participating from East Africa, West Africa, North Africa, Central Africa, to ensure the global recognition and simultaneously strengthen institutional capacity, aligning our curricula with emerging market needs, and expanding entrepreneurship opportunities and incubation centers for our young people to foster their own enterprise growth. So, ladies and gentlemen, SMEs, as you know, they make up 90% of businesses in Africa. They provide about 80% of the employment. And in most countries, they generate more than half of the GDP. But however, we know that from evidence, women, youth, SMEs, and informal workers, they face very distinct constraints. Regional integration policies must be designed to ensure these underserved beneficiaries can actually access and benefit from economic opportunities. We must remember that inclusive growth is not a side effect. It's a central objective for the demographic dividend agenda. So as part of the African Continental Free Trade Area, SMEs are increasingly crucial in integrating the regional value chains and boosting intra-African trade. Now, effective policymaking depends on reliable evidence. Many of our nations will face gaps in labor market information and migration data. Without robust data systems, we cannot accurately identify the constraints or scale successful interventions and strengthen accountability. To move Thailand and grow our economies, we must invest in evidence that tells us exactly where the barriers remain and where the opportunities are waiting. But finally, we must be realistic that governments alone cannot deliver this dividend. The private sector will be the primary creator of the millions of jobs required over the coming decades. So to connect youth to economic opportunities at scale, we need greater involvement, greater investment, deeper regional markets, and a strong public-private partnership. The realization of Africa's demographic dividend will not be determined by just policy choices or institutional reforms, but the collective ability, together with the private sector, to translate that evidence into action. So let me maybe end by providing you with a few impact choices on incentives, reforms, investments that are needed to turn Africa's demographic boom into a dividend. So the first, based on my earlier conversation, is that we must build market-relevant human capital. We must reform the education system towards STEM, TVET, and digital skills. We must expand apprenticeship, invest in healthcare and nutrition, because evidence shows that employable skills aligned to the labor market demand are essential to harness Africa's demographic dividend. So the first is to make sure we build market-relevant human capital. So skills-first education, shifting the focus from traditional degrees to specific competencies and work-based learning, very critical. Industry partnerships, establishing advisory boards, sector committees, and regular consultations with industry leaders to ensure curriculum reflect current technology and skills, such as AI and digital literacy. So the dynamic curriculum updates, also using data systems to track real-time labor market trends and adjust programs to match the growing demand of industries. So very, very critical. The second is enable labor mobility using the Africa Continental Free Trade Area provision. Of course, as you know, the AfCTA connects 1.3 billion people across 55 countries with a combined GDP valued over $3.4 trillion. Huge opportunity. But however, we must leverage its provisions, especially the AU free movement of persons protocol, to facilitate cross-border labor mobility. So this will allow us to harmonize skills recognition frameworks, reduce visa barriers, create regional labor markets, etc., building on some of the examples I gave earlier on the investments the bank is making to make this a reality. Third, we need to accelerate job-rich structural transformation. So promoting manufacturing, agro-processing, and tradable services through industrial policy, special economic zones, but also value chain development. So Africa should shift from jobless growth to productive employment creation to absorb the millions of young people entering the labor market annually. Fourth, unlock entrepreneurship and SME growth. I need not to overemphasize this, I've already talked about it. But expand access to finance via blended finance, venture capital, and credit guarantee. So we need a little bit of innovation on the aspect of access to finance. Fifth, invest in infrastructure and digital transformation. Scale investments in energy, transport, logistics, and broadband infrastructure. Digital transformation is essential to integrate young people to modern service-led economies and improve productivity. So we are at a juncture where we can either benefit or suffer from the consequences of the AI revolution. So we really need to make a strategic choice here. Finally, strengthen governance, inclusion, and labor markets. So improving policy coordination, data systems, regulatory frameworks that promote gender inclusion, and modern labor market institutions to ensure broad-based participation and productivity gains. We also are saying that let's implement the youth jobs and skills marker system, not just to equip the bank, but to equip regional member countries as engines of inclusive economic growth, skills development, and job creation. I mean, the investment the bank makes is only this much, but when you look at the resources that are available at regional member country level, they are quite significant. And we strongly believe that we need to help our regional member countries make the right decisions in terms of where to invest for job creation. And this is why we think this system should not be confined to improving the bank's own investment. It should really be applied at the level of regional member countries. We also need to harmonize indicators, strengthen estimates of youth and job skills outcomes. So improving our data, including disaggregation. As they say, if you can't measure it, you can't achieve it. So improving monitoring and results measurement system with a focus on export measurements to verify and report credible results is also very critical. So with that, I would like to thank you very much and wish you a successful deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tapera, for those powerful remarks that definitely provide us a lot of food for thought. I think you've laid out very clearly what the problem ahead of us is, but more importantly, not just the problem, but the opportunities that we have as a continent to really transform this demographic growth into a dividend. I'm particularly happy that you mentioned some of the protocols that exist that we can use, the Free Movement of People Protocol of the AU, the AfCFTA that allows the continent to be connected in terms of trade. But the examples you gave of Nigeria and Angola are also very illustrative, because this is what I take from those is that the youth are not just a problem to be managed, but they are also creating the opportunities through their startups, through their businesses, that they are part of the solution in terms of creating employment opportunities, businesses that then drive the continent forward. And I'm looking forward, I see a lot of young people in the audience, so I'm also looking forward to later hearing from you on what is your part in all this. What are you doing as young people? So thank you so much for that. We are now going to listen to two case studies. Both of them are online, and I'll ask them to go one after the other. You are the ones that will help us catch up on time. So although the program gave you a whole 20 minutes, I would like to ask that you take 10 to 15 minutes so that we can catch up on time. First, we have Dr. Paul Mpuga, who's the Division Manager for Macroeconomic Policy, Debt Sustainability and Forecasting here at the bank, who will provide a case study on mobility and labor migration systems. And he will be followed by Naomi Schifero, who's a senior thematic specialist on labor migration and social inclusion at the IOM. And she will come immediately after Paul to provide her case study. So over to you, Paul, to talk to us about mobility and labor migration systems, followed by Naomi on skills development and women and youth participation.
Thank you very much, Jemima. Most pleased to share thoughts on population mobility and labor migration in Africa. Apologies, I could not be in the room. My son turned 18 this week, graduated from high school last week, and I had to be in Nairobi to manage that transition and to encourage him as part of the demographic transition. So I'm not in the room, but I'm there in spirit. I'll be fairly brief because a lot of mileage has been covered by yourself in the introductory remarks as well as Tapera. I framed the presentation. We could go to the next slide, please. The outline. Framed from the perspective of Africa's growth, Africa's demography, and what opportunities present from this perspective. And then look at migration systems, the challenge of jobs, the challenge of productivity, the challenge of efficiency before migration systems, the big issue of informality and how that is informing Africa's labor movements, but productivity and efficiency. And then we look at a few policy options. A lot has already been mentioned. So we could move forward. Looking at Africa today, Africa finds itself at a critical juncture in its development journey, in its growth and population. Today, Africa has a large population, about 1.5 billion people, fastest growing population across the globe, with fertility rates of about 3.8 children per woman of reproductive age compared to 2.2 globally. Several other regions are facing declining population growth rates with the fertility rates below sustaining their populations. Africa has that potential to actually be the engine of labor over the coming decades. Africa today finds itself in an evolving global political and economic landscape shaped by moving parts, conflicts in different regions, declining financing for development, and geopolitical fragmentation. But Africa's growth over the last 20 years has been resilient at about 3.8% per annum, In the last year alone, 2025, growth was about 4.4%, higher than other regions, underscoring the potential that Africa possesses. We've already talked about the share of Africa's population under 25 years of age, about 60%. And all this creates momentum for Africa's growth. But can this demographic potential, this demographic advantage, be converted into a demographic dividend where the young people can drive growth, faster rates of growth? Yes and no. Yes, because the young people are ready, willing, and happy to contribute to Africa's growth. The challenge, the no, is because of the lack of skills, the lack of opportunity. And therefore, Africa needs to create jobs at a much faster rate. Decent jobs beyond what we are seeing now, strengthened ability for populations to move across the continent. We need to forget about the boundaries that were created in the 18th, 19th century and move as one continent in order to develop Africa. These are things that we'll need to continue debating and until solutions are activated. Let's move to the next slide. I've talked about Africa's growth already, happening within the framework of geopolitical fragmentation. But looking at 2025, growth at 4.4% was higher than 3.5% in 2024 and higher than the global average of about 3.4%. Growth was broad-based. 36 countries expanded compared to 2024. 22 of them grew by more than 5%, and 6 of them exceeded 7%. In 2025, Africa accounted for 12 of the world's fastest 20 growing economies. This is reason to celebrate, but also a challenge to do more. Because if we move to the next slide, we see that Africa's growth has not yet generated sufficient jobs, because at 4.4%, at 3.8%, growth is still lower than the 7 to 10% threshold needed to fast track structural transformation. Many of the world's fastest growing, most grown economies, economies that have structurally transformed, grew at rates of about 7 to 10% over prolonged periods of time. So we need to fast track Africa's growth to reach that threshold of 7 to 10% for structural transformation to happen, to reduce poverty effectively and to create decent jobs. With the top 10% of Africa's population accounting for 40 to 45% of total income, poverty, inequality, youth unemployment remain pervasive. Today, Africa accounts for about 17% of world population, but produces only about 3% of the world's GDP, gross domestic income. This is a structural productivity gap that continues to hinder the growth of jobs and expansion of employment. Looking at inefficiency, we find in the latest African Economic Outlook that Africa is a continent with the highest rates of inefficiency in terms of public investment and outcomes at 41%, implying that for every dollar of public resources invested in the continent, only 59% yields returns. We need to do more to capture the 41%. This is lost through bureaucracy, it's lost through inefficiencies, it's lost through weak governance systems, state capture, etc. We must address these so that every dollar invested in Africa in infrastructure, in healthcare, in education, yields returns that will be beneficial to the population. Africa requires at least 25 million jobs every year in order to accommodate the existing gap and to absorb the growing workforce. 10 to 12 million new workers enter the job market, but only 3 million jobs are created. 73% of employment is in low productivity, family-run enterprises, as I said, encompassed by informality, meaning that the rate of productivity, the rate of further potential for further job creation is limited, and therefore more must be done. This underscores the urgent need to elevate productivity, accelerate structural transformation, and deepen inclusive job creation and expand opportunities. It requires a big shift from current production systems, from commodity dependence to manufacturing, agro-processing, digital services, and from informal sector to the formal sector. If we move to the next slide. Looking at Africa's population mobility and looking at mobility comprehensively, population mobility and migration have been as old as humanity, and therefore this must be part and parcel of Africa's growth and development. Labor mobility is critical for regional integration. It's critical for overall Africa's growth. What is important to note that over 50% of African migrants actually remain on the continent. Intra-African mobility is the dominant form of population movement. And this is not surprising because across borders, you find communities that are related, communities with intermarriage, communities that share the same cultural backgrounds. So for them, moving is part and parcel of their life. And our systems, our governments must promote this movement. Populations must be skilled so that when they move, they are able to create production, employment where they move and move back to their communities, remit financing, and expand financial flows. In 2010, intra-African migration has increased, since 2010, has increased by 43.6% compared to extra-Africa movement, which has increased by only about 26%. This shows something going on the continent, that opportunities exist and people move because they want to look out for opportunities within and stay within. But of course, some of the restrictions beyond Africa mean that the population will want to stay within Africa. 86% of African refugees and asylum seekers are actually hosted within Africa. Again, this talks about what Africa has to offer for its own population. Main intra-African population movement and corridors within Central Africa accounting for about 14% of movements, West Africa accounting for 28%, Southern Africa accounting for 17%, mostly migrants from that region moving towards South Africa, drawn by wage differentials and relative economic development. And then East Africa at the top, accounting for about 30% of population movement, with IGAD region migrants increasing by about 66% in the last decade. Extra-regional, extra-continental mobility, a lot of population going to Europe, France, UK, Spain, Italy. The Gulf region, now involved in conflict, attracts at least 5 million people from Africa. It's the fastest growing. Movement of people comes with benefits. Diaspora remittances to Africa reached $104.6 billion in 2024, more than overseas development assistance. Remittances are projected to reach up to $1.1 trillion by 2050. Therefore, we need to harness this resource as one of the drivers of Africa's development. Let's move to the next slide. We look at the drivers of mobility quickly, and then what's conclusions. The drivers of mobility include economic and structural issues, the gaps in employment, wage differentials across borders. For example, between South Africa and its neighbors, wage differentials can reach up to 3 to 1 in terms of what people can earn within South Africa and outside of South Africa. Youth unemployment, underemployment, where overall unemployment in Africa is registered at about 10%. There is a lot of underemployment and disguised unemployment on the continent. Only 1 in 4 workers in Africa holds a formal wage paying job. The rest are in informal jobs. And this creates a lot of disguised employment, low income, low returns, leading to people trying to move in search of opportunities elsewhere. Skills are missing. Only about 9% of youth complete tertiary education in Africa. Average years of schooling is under 9, compared to global average of about 13. And at 9 years of education, somebody has just completed the primary level plus a few years of secondary, not sufficient to make them skilled, not sufficient to give them a long-term employment prospects and earning income. The rural-urban wage gaps are big, promoting rural-urban migration, which act as precursors to cross-border movement. Climate and conflict. In 2024, there were at least 8.4 million people displaced because of climate-related issues. The Sahel, the Horn of Africa, Southern Africa region face periodic flooding, droughts, which cause food insecurity and therefore push for people to move in search of livelihoods. Gaps in governance, restrictive border regimes. At least 50% of African states still require visas for most of African visitors, despite the protocols on the free movement of people, which was agreed in 2018, but not ratified. the 15 countries needed to ratify this protocol have not yet deposited their documents for the same. Weak civil registration, limited data are some of the challenges that face our understanding and knowledge about labor mobility on the continent. Let's move to the next slide, looking at informality and how this is affecting Africa's economic productivity and therefore our drive for people to move. At least 86% of employment in Africa is informal. About 30 to 40, 50% of GDP is derived from the informal sector. In some countries, it is more than 60%. This leads to low productivity and low job creation. Evidence shows that a 10-point reduction, a 10 percentage point reduction in the informal sector could actually increase Africa's GDP growth by 1 to 2%. And formalization of the informal sector can add up to $125 billion in revenue, public revenue, without necessarily raising taxes. These are opportunities that we could harness, and we'll look quickly at what can be done. Women, young people find themselves in mostly in the informal sector and working hard, but producing little. As mentioned earlier, the women and youth who are not in employment, not in education, the rates are much higher compared to those of men, at 27% for young women compared to about 17% for young men. These are challenges that could be addressed and get Africa to grow faster, and also support the movement of people with skills across the continent. Looking at policy recommendations, next slide, please. Political leadership to accelerate the ratification of the African Union Free Movement of People Protocol is very, very critical. This aligns with Agenda 2063 vision of labor mobility and aspiration 2 towards a holistic strategy for African development and integration. It is critical for implementing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, free trade area, and we all need to support this. There are several other protocols that need to be fast-tracked. The Single African Air Transport Market, the regional protocols, regional frameworks, ECOWAS, IGAD, etc., that also need to be fast-tracked. Accelerating the AU passport initiative beyond the diplomats to reach all citizens is very critical. Embedding labor mobility into the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, free trade area is critical. Digital credentials and e-migration platforms are critical to realizing this dream. Doubling Africa's growth rate of capital stock from the current about 3.3% to 8.7% is critical to achieving the growth rate of 7 to 10% that we aspire in order to promote inclusive growth and structural transformation. This will help to create economic activity, to accelerate economic activity at country level and reduce the tendency for people to want to move, but also attract skills from other countries in order to benefit from the accelerating growth. Like we are seeing now, people wanting to move to the Middle East or to Europe because of the demand for existing jobs in those regions. We can create those regions on the continent. Accelerate industrial policy and infrastructure development, already mentioned, in order to create the 25 million new jobs for the population, expand investment in sustainable infrastructure, expand investment in agro-industrial processing zones are very, very critical. If we move to the next slide, and that will be my last, scaling up human capital is extremely critical. Investing in technical, vocational, and in entrepreneurship are very, very critical. Digital capabilities, we must invest in the teachers who teach the children of Africa, improving their skills, paying them decent wages so that they can focus on the job for which they register to implement. Evidence shows that an additional year of schooling in Africa can actually improve productivity by up to 7.5%. So we must move from the current about 9 average years of schooling of 9 to 13 to 15 in order to promote productivity in Africa. Governments, development partners need to support African countries to develop regional qualification frameworks that recognize, have mutual recognition agreements of skills of what exists across the border that the countries can benefit from. Labor migration needs to facilitate human capital development, skills acquisition, technology transfer, so that young people have what it takes to develop themselves where they are or to move with skills across the borders. The AfDB successor programs to the Jobs for Youth strategy need to connect skills pipelines to migration governance. Promote youth and women engagement. Finally, evidence should drive policy. Quality and timely data are critical. Evaluations need to be conducted for every project that we undertake. Government projects need to be supported to evaluate so that we can learn from what is done. We learn what works, what does not work, and what needs to be accelerated in order to promote growth, to promote job creation, and to support formal labor movement across the continent. I'll stop there and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all. That was really actually very interesting data. I love data because it always really makes the invisible visible. The fact that we actually have more African people migrating within the continent, because what you see is often the data of those that are going outside the continent and not within the continent. But also thank you for those very clear policy recommendations. I do not want to interrupt our speakers, so please keep time, help us catch up on time. Otherwise, we do have another session that will be happening immediately after this one, so please keep to time. I would now like to invite Ms. Naomi Shifero for the case study on skills development and women and youth participation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm facing some technological challenges. Okay. Thank you very much again, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel this morning. My name is Naomi Shifarao, and I am the regional thematic specialist working on labor migration and social inclusion issues with the IOM Regional Office for West and Central Africa. And maybe let me also start to wish everyone a happy International Day of Remittances. June 16th is a day where when we give recognition to the millions of migrants across the globe who make huge contributions to their communities and countries of origin. A lot has been said and a number of compelling data sets have been shared. So I will not dwell on that, but I will make sure that I give a few lessons learned and evidence drawn from the programmatic interventions that IOM has across the continent. So when we speak about skills development, especially in the context of regional integration, this is not a standalone discussion. It's connected to many other dimensions, including human mobility and the migration patterns, which speakers have already alluded to, and also economic opportunities. So when we put on the migration and mobility lens, skills are critical assets that individuals carry throughout their migratory journey. So as a migrant, the knowledge, the competencies, and the experience they possess would really make a difference on the quality of their migration story. So it's extremely important that those assets are recognized. That allows them to contribute to the economic development of their countries, but also their destination countries where they find themselves in. When defining the skills priorities in Africa, it's extremely important that we explore integrated approaches across policy domains. And this is really what I'd like to demonstrate this morning. Skills development is not, will not get us the results that we would want to see on the continent if it's not linked to other policy domains, to social inclusion, to migration and mobility policies, and displacement policies that are in place. So the scale of the opportunity has already been highlighted. The demographic dividend is a real potential, but it requires a deliberate investment in key areas on skills, on recognition of qualifications and prior learning, on ethical recruitment to make sure that the pathways that we are creating also uphold the safeguarding of rights in terms of social protection, access to finance, regular mobility pathways. All these elements are really key to ensuring that the demographic dividend of the continent is really reaches its full potential. So a singular investment in any of those areas that I mentioned by itself will not fully unlock Africa's demographic dividend. Hence the need for more integrated approaches. And IOM and many other development partners working on the continent are collaborating, are designing interventions that would help reach a maximum number of people and equip them for them to become economic agents who have choices and who can contribute meaningfully to the economic and sustainable development of the continent. Many of the challenges that have been mentioned previously are very key. We see that African firms, the private sector, identify the skills shortages as one big hindrance for their productivity. So that's an opportunity if it is met with the right kind of investments. With the digital and technological shift that the job market is witnessing, more jobs will be requiring upskilling and reskilling in the coming years. So how are we equipping young Africans to meet the job market of today and tomorrow? So if you put the different challenges together, it's an interconnected web of issues that we may be raising. But one key message that I would want to leave is skills development, of course, needs to respond to labor market demands, but it also needs to be backed with recognized certification, because that's what really makes a difference for individual workers, a young person staying at home or traveling abroad for employment opportunities will have a different experience based on the certification they carry. And this also applies to bigger opportunities in terms of regular labor mobility pathways. So I will go quickly over this because a number of these issues have been extensively covered by previous speakers: skills mismatch, youth unemployment, informality, limited recognition of skills and prior learning. These challenges show the different facets of the strained realities that most African countries are facing in terms of creating opportunities for the young people who are joining the job market every year. In many instances, most of our programmatic response focuses on creating skills and designing trainings for a big number of people. But these efforts will fail unless they are connected to employer demand, unless they are producing recognized skills in the form of certifications, and to make the links with the previous speaker, if the skills that are in surplus in African labor markets are not connected to regular labor mobility pathways in Am I connected? Perfect. Apologies for the technical hiccup. I think I'm back. So picking up where I left off, the hello? Hello?
Naomi, can you hear us? Can you hear me? It seems we don't have Naomi back. Can you hear me, Naomi? What I'll probably do is we have a panel discussion coming on right after Naomi. What I would like us to do is go to the panel discussion, and then we will come back to Naomi once the tech team has sorted out her technical difficulties. So if I could ask the tech team to please write to Naomi and say we will get back to her as soon as we are done with the panel discussion so that we do not delay too much. I would now like us to move to the next part of this discussion, a panel discussion to explore some of the common threads that we have been hearing this morning. A couple of interesting topics that I would like us to explore as we go into the panel discussion. We've heard about digital skills and AI and how we can make sure that the skills we are developing today are actually adaptable to the jobs of today and tomorrow. And that's going to require skills, digital skills and technological skills. The other topic that's coming up in the presentations we have had today is how do we align skills development with skills needs. The third one is on regional integration and the opportunities, including mobility, how we ensure recognition of certification, but also taking advantage of some of the existing protocols, including the AfCTA. In formalizing the informal sector and the potential that that holds, but also some of the gender gaps that we see and how we close those gaps. So to help us explore these topics, I would like to invite to the stage our panelists. First is Dr. Andrew Aliu, who's a senior economist with the International Labour Organization, who's joining us here in person. Andrew, please take the stage. Next, we have Ms. Sakina Mwenyimukuu, who's the Director, Performance Monitoring and Evaluation, the Prime Minister's Office of the United Republic of Tanzania. Thank you for joining us in person as well, Ms. Sakina. Next is David Niels Prue, who's the Chief of Mission of IOM here in Côte d'Ivoire, who's also joining us in person. Thank you, David, for joining us. And online, we will have my colleague, Dr. Paul Mpuga, as I mentioned, who's the Division Manager for the Macroeconomic Policy, Debt Sustainability, and Forecasting. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm still going to be depending on you to catch up on time, and since I'm sitting next to you, that's going to be a little bit easier. But thank you so much for joining us for this IDEV week, where we're really exploring how we can use what we have learned about what works to have transformative impact and to convert this demographic growth in the continent into a dividend, especially for young people, for women of the continent. So I'm going to start with you, Andrew. You have a new publication on algorithms of exploitation, rights abuses in the gig economy and the global fight for change. And what I like about your publication is that it highlights both the opportunities that we've been talking about of digital technologies, of AI, but it also talks about the risks of digital labor platforms. My question to you is, given the potential that we know of digital technologies and digital platforms, how can we ensure that these platforms really provide decent jobs, fair standards, portable benefits, and social protections, especially for young people in the continent? You have about 3 minutes to respond. I'll come back with another round of questions. So don't feel the need to tell us everything. Keep some for the end.
Thank you very much, Jemima, and thank you to the bank for this invitation. Before I start, I think this is a new audience, so I have to obey instructions of my speech therapist. I'm a stammerer, so not normally I speak a bit, I pace myself, but also the pitch goes up and down. So since this is a new panel, audience, thank you. And indeed, the digital economy in Africa is growing very fast. Some estimates put it at about 5% of the continent's GDP, and that's projected to about 8.5% of the continent's GDP by 2050. E-commerce is growing very fast. By end 2025, e-commerce platforms had reached about 520 million people on the continent. Similarly, digital trade generated about 3 million direct jobs in 2025. The growth rate of these digital platforms have been quite impressive. From between 2010 to 2025, they've grown by about 450%. And Kenya is one of the countries, is in the top 15 countries globally whose share of people employed on the global scale on the digital platform quite high. Of course, the challenges of this platform are enormous as well. Employment conditions, rights, limited rights, limited or no social protection, lack of occupational safety and health, and then the issue of algorithms. Basically, machines making critical decisions around labor matters. But I want to situate the question into something really very concrete. A few days ago, just around Friday, the International Labour Conference adopted a new convention, which is numbered Convention 193, on decent work on the platform economy. So gradually we are moving from theoretical and wishful to more concrete and, where possible, legally binding instruments. Of course, I'm sure there's somebody in the audience who is cheekily saying, wow, another convention, and who is going to ratify it? Who is going to? The value of conventions do not always lie in the number of ratifications. Normally, the conventions inform what we see. They provide guidance, they provide benchmarks. So most of us here don't even think that our hours of work, the maternity protection, the paternity leave, and the labor rights, the fact that we are part of the staff union in our institutions are actually linked to these conventions that we don't. So conventions are quite important. But let me now address, but also I think I don't want to miss the point that the continent sat and wait for this convention. So there are a number of countries on the continent, Kenya, Morocco, South Africa, Nigeria, Rwanda, that had made strides towards protecting workers on the platform economy. At the continental level, we have the African Union Digital Compact, and then the African Union Digital Transformation Strategy. So the continent was also been doing quite a lot in terms of protecting. But just as a quick reminder as well, the process of the convention started in 2022 with a normative gaps analysis, a law and practice report. So it's quite an elaborate and a questionnaire to member states, all member states of the ILO, and we successfully got input into this new convention from 150 member states. So it's actually owned by. This convention is the first global digital framework to address digital innovations, workers' rights, businesses, and the benefits to society. I would like to quickly situate this as well, just a connection that with the AfCFTA Digital Trade Protocol, which provides guidance on how trade is organized, how rules, but also link it that this is quite timely and complementary because it links it to not only trade, but also actively the labor dimensions of those trade and digital trade and how people are protected. I think most speakers have expressed concern about the protection. So this is really a good complementary. So how quickly will this new protocol address the issues that have been in terms of labor protection, social protection, and rights at work, fundamental principles? Quickly, one is the issue of clarity, definition, and measurement. The old adage in development circles, you can only manage or govern what you can identify and measure. So I think this protocol, this convention is really, really very important. It's also important in the context of our discussions of mobility, because the digital platforms transcend borders. So a clarity about what is digital work, how people are protected, how rules reflect is actually quite important. It also will form a basis of statistical measurement because part of the challenge we've had is that we cannot really, there's no clear definition. Then of course, people who are protected, and it talks about both the employed and self-employed. It talks about equality of treatment for migrant workers, the convention, and also issues around social protection, the rights of platform workers, social protection, automation, which is about the algorithm. It seeks to establish some transparency, responsible use, safeguards, and also how information is shared. And finally, to link this to the demographic, just quickly, our work that led to this convention also brought interesting dimensions. First of all, that most of the work on the digital around transport and delivery services, which we already know, that the significant number of workers are actually doing this not as their primary job. So I think that also has very important. Then age. Our law and practice report showed that the people on the platform economy are relatively younger compared to, and that has implications in terms of skills, but also the question is, why are they there? And importantly, it also showed that they are more educated on average than those who are in traditional sectors. So that also, and they are mostly informal. It also speaks to, but also importantly, what we don't get a lot from the demographic dividend discussions is not only the numbers, is where does the employment prospects lie for these people? Return on digital transfer, what happens to agriculture, what happens to the rural economy, urban cities, and the like. So I will stop here for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think it's really important what you say about the convention. But what is striking also is, Africa always is a continent of innovation, that even ahead of the convention, we are already seeing such huge development in terms of digital platforms. And you've put the convention very much in context, that it actually then guides the already happening practice across countries, but also that it provides the safeguards, the standards, the workers' rights that are actually needed in that economy. So thank you very much for that perspective. I was actually reading the outcomes of the International Labour Congress, and I was very happy to see also some very strong recommendations on gender equality in the workplace as well. I want to turn to you, Sakina. One of the things we've had this morning from almost all our speakers actually is this skills mismatch, that the skills provided by our education systems to young people are not matching what employers want. I have my own perspectives of the philosophy of education, but I do want to hear from you. What is Tanzania doing to ensure that skills development, whether we're talking about digital skills, vocational training, are actually aligned with what the country needs at this point in time and the future, but also what the continent and global market need, given some of the patterns we have seen of labor mobility, that countries are not just producing skills just for the country, but also for what the continent and the global economy needs.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Good morning, everyone. And I would like to comment on the presentation that have been made from the contributors online, but also your opening remarks at the beginning. It was really good insights that were presented, but also has helped us to understand a lot of progress that we are making in Africa in general. Back to the question on skills mismatch. Actually, Tanzania, like other African countries, I think we also face this challenge of skills mismatch, and sometimes it comes to the point that demoralize our youth who are growing in terms of number. Because if you look even our country population, youth have a big number. So it's really a big challenge. But what we have done as a country, first is looking on the source, because we had to rethink on our education system first, because we have a lot of areas to look for in making some of the reforms, but we had to check on our education system. And we have a new education policy that has tried to, just to, not 100% to cure the situation, but at least to try to reduce some of the challenges that have been seen. Our education policy now is more focusing on giving priority to technical vocation education training. Of course, if you look our history in Tanzania way back during after colonial period, most of our education system, the focus were on this vocational training. But I don't know what went wrong in the mid, and then we went to another system which actually has led to these results that we make us to go back and rethink our education system and reform and coming back on the vocational training. So this actually has helped a lot, because through the reform has made to introduce the new curriculum from primary schools to secondary schools, and now even at college and university levels. You see also the focus has changed because the growing number of population and the growing number of people not being employed in formal sectors is a very risk situation, especially to countries which are developing like Tanzania. So now the efforts that have been made by the government is really promising, because you cannot see it maybe today and tomorrow, but we're quite sure with the coming 5 years, some of the changes will also be seen. And actually, the big number of people coming from Tanzania, the youth can be employed also other countries. But also, it's a call for, not only for Tanzania, for other countries also to recheck and reform some of the education systems, at least to allow other skills to be recognized by other countries, because it's very unfortunate if you have been qualified from one country, but you are disqualified to other countries, and you are saying you are also living in one continent. If you want to open our borders, then we need also to recheck on other angles that facilitate our mobility and encourage economic development across our Africa free continent area. But additionally, we also need to check on recognizing also these emerging disciplines, especially an area which promotes development, like in transport sector, in renewable energy, technology. My friend has just shared his insights on a paper that has published. Because these areas sometimes, they are not more, they are new and are not well known by some of the countries. So we need to promote, because they are the engine also for development. So that's my contribution, but I think I will add more if you give me more chance.
Thank you very much, Sakina, also for linking the issue of skills development with the country priorities and what's needed to actually drive the country. What are the sectors that are really driving the country's economy, and are we developing the skills that then enable those sectors to develop? I'll come to you, David. Paul said 53% of the people moving from their own countries are going to other African countries. But we still have 47% that are moving outside of the continent. Now, the stories we see more often are, people in little boats lost at sea as they try to seek better opportunities outside their countries. What practical measures can African countries actually take to ensure even this 47% that are moving out of the continent can actually do it in a safe way, that they can find productive and decent employment, that they are not also just going in as unskilled labor, because we know a lot of them are actually skilled labor, but a lot of the certifications are actually not allowing them to take on skilled employment. What are some of the things that we need to be doing to make sure that that happens?
Thank you for the question. I know the figure came from the African Migration Report, but I would argue that the most recent figure from the World Migration Report, it's actually 70 to 80% the migration from the African continent that stays within the African continent. But it doesn't change the situation you've described. I mean, we're still facing a dramatic number of deaths every year on migration journey, especially irregular migration journey. It's close to, I think it went over 80,000 recorded deaths on the different paths since 2014. And we often think, because it's often portrayed in the media about the Mediterranean Sea and the crossing to Europe, but there are also intra-African journeys that are very deadly. I mean, the crossing of the Sahara Desert or some desert in Ethiopia on the way for Middle East, for example, crossing the Strait of Aden. So it's not an isolated or geographic specific problem. It's a wider issue. Another thing we need to factor in when we think about this dangerous journey is the constantly evolving situation. We've been talking a lot about digitalization this morning, and that's also a new trend we are seeing. So concretely speaking, trafficking in person with the objective of forced criminality, usually using digital ways to achieve this objective. So that, again, is a problem Southeastern Asia is more familiar with. It's been well documented over there. But if I can, for example, give a figure for Côte d'Ivoire, specifically the analysis of the data for last year in terms of people that were assisted in trafficking situation, 40% of the cases of people assisted were actually victim of this kind of trafficking for forced criminality. So as much as digitalization is a formidable tool to improve youth employability and what we've been talking about since this morning, it also presents inherent threats and need to be looked at. So what we can concretely do, right, to address this situation and improve the situation. I think the first thing to do is getting better data on information on labor market. So labor market, but also better information management system for labor migration and to document the situation over there. Because as we know, youth employability is essentially driven by the private sector, and understanding better the need of the private sector is what's required to bridge that divide between qualification, how we organize training and our different curriculum, and meet this private sector demand and enable our youth to access to a job. So identifying labor shortages, and also identifying qualification needs from the employer is really fundamental, so that training curricula can be driven toward those specific needs. There has been a study about covering 200 labor market, and that shows clearly that training developed in isolation, that's not connected to the private sector labor demand, is unlikely to yield any very significant positive result. And I wouldn't be IOM representative if I wasn't talking also about skill mobility pathway, right? So this is a second instrument I would like to put forward this morning. So it presents this pathway. They present several advantages. They bring together all concerned actors. So oftentimes when they are developed, often through bilateral migration agreement, they bring trade unions, employers, government, workers themselves, recruitment agency together to agree on labor shortage needs that can be met by those pathways, but also qualification required, social protection mechanism, portability of rights, and so on, and condition for worker to relocate in which they will live, basically. So that allows a lot of predictability and protection for the workers themselves, while this matching of labor with private sector demand, it increases success of employability rate, right? We have several programs where we had as high as 85% retention rate, in our matching of worker with vacancy through those organized labor migration schemes. And it's important. I mean, we often talk about these schemes from Africa toward Europe. I mean, you heard about the EU talent pathway, for example, or green corridors. And so I think it would be important for Africa as a continent to also look at similar initiative Obviously, in parallel of pushing forward the Continental Free Trade agenda, a free protocol for the movement of person, obviously essential to promote this kind of agreement. This agreement, they also, this skill mobility pathway, they also allow countries to mutualize some costs, right? Because it's not like private sector demand are specific sometimes to one country, for example. And so by that, you can also mutual trainings opportunity. And what's important is beside the cost benefit of mutualizing those costs, the training costs, you also meet both the destination country demand, but also the origin country demand. So you kind of circumvent that problem we often talk about brain drains, right? And that becomes a very effective way and protective way for migrant worker to find better working condition and securing those jobs. And I think other panelists and other presenters have mentioned it, so I'll be just hammering the nail over on the head again. But the portability of both qualification, but also social rights are essential. A qualification that cannot cross border is not going to generate any value, right? We've made some progress. I think the concept of the African skill passport is the aspiration the continent should strive toward. A bit more concretely to nowadays situation, we have, of course, the African Union Continental Qualification Framework that's offer a basis for all the countries in the continent to work toward and harmonize and make this recognition easier. The digital platform for recognition is a good tool, also allowing all the actors that I mentioned to have to kind of verify if a migrant worker comes from this kind of academical background, if he has the required qualification. But the thing we need to focus on, and probably a policy recommendation for state, is to work on their own national qualification framework, because there are still too little countries on the continent that have very formalized and aligned to the EU standard qualification framework. I think it's 22, but maybe my figures are outdated, and I'm only with evaluation specialists, so I'm scared now to put figures forward too carelessly. But then if you allow me a last word, I think, again, migrant protection should be at the center of all those policy reform. So making sure that we vet recruiters, the government and the authority vet recruiters, so that migrants are not falling in these exploitative schemes, that qualification and job demands is matched before the departure, that protection measure in the countries of destination are there, whether it's hotline and complaints and feedback mechanism to strengthen consular services for migrants in difficult situation to be able to access for help. And finally, the portability of social rights. I mean, migrants are net contributors. It's been well documented in OECD. It's not like they are draining social protection system. The problem is that they cannot contribute if they are not traveling in those formal situations, and we need to build those regular pathways for them to access to that.
Thank you so much. Very many practical things that can actually happen. Portability of social protections, national certification systems that actually apply across countries, safer migration, more broader recognition of the certifications across countries, a skills passport, an African skills passport. So very, very practical recommendations there on where we should be moving to and where we need to accelerate action. I'm going to come to you, Paul, online very, very briefly, because you talked about in your policy recommendations about the regional protocols. You talked about the need to accelerate these. We've seen in the continent the ease of movement is improving. There is more and more countries announcing visa-free entry for other African countries, but we also know that this needs to move much faster. So what is urgently needed to ensure that these regional commitments actually deliver tangible mobility benefits
for young people? How do we move from protocols to actual implementation and impact?
Thank you, moderator, and thanks, my fellow panelists. We need to look at the issue of population movement and labor migration from the perspective of this being as old as humanity. And therefore, the borders we have today should actually not restrict population movements, and we should facilitate population movements in search of opportunities, in search of different settings altogether. So three things. One, governance and political leadership are very, very critical. Our political leaders need to agree to time-bound ratifications of the existing protocols, because they have signed to these protocols and they agreed to the protocols. We need them implemented. What is needed are getting data systems in place, getting evidence, and then working through the agreed and available platforms, including the Pan-African Forum on Migration, the regional migration dialogue systems, so that the pending issues, political issues and sovereignty issues, can be addressed at that level and give momentum to implementing, to ratification of these protocols. Second is ensuring we have consistent and interoperable data systems, civil registration systems, to know who is moving and when did they arrive, what are they doing, what are they contributing, what facilitation do they require? Like the colleagues on panelists have said, how are their rights protected, and how are the benefits from their coming into the country, supporting the country and supporting their people back home, the remittances. As we've seen, Africa gained up to $104 billion in remittances from the population living in the diaspora, more than what we received in terms of official development assistance. We can't let this opportunity go by continuing to restrict the movement of people. Three, digitalization, financial inclusion, facilitating the people who move, and then easing the life at borders. We have regional protocols and agreements for the movement of people and goods, but when you get to the borders, you find restrictions, trucks staying at the borders for 3-4 days, 1 week. And what is needed is documentation. The drivers will have the documents. Passengers in the buses have the documentation. We need to facilitate, to actually effectively implement the one border crossing points, integrate labor movement within the African Continental Free Trade Area as part and parcel of implementing this continental agreement, support regional projects, regional development projects, and intra-Africa trade as precursors to the free movement of people. We will achieve it. We can get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I really, really like this idea of integrating labor mobility in the AfCFTA. Yeah? So that it is part and parcel of that, but also addressing those non-tariff barriers where, you know, documents say one thing, but once you are at the border, the experience is actually quite different, whether it's harassment, whether it's, you know, various border stops that then limit that free movement that is promised in the protocol. So thank you very much. I had a second question for all the panelists, but instead of asking that question, I want to come back to you as the audience, both in the room and online, to see whether you have any questions for our panelists based on what you have heard today. I have one or two from our online participants, but looking to the room to see there's a microphone. Please, if you have a question, just raise your hand. If you would like to direct it to a specific panelist, please do so as well. Do we have any questions, any comments, any experiences on the topics we are discussing this morning? I can see one there. Please introduce yourself and then ask your question, being as brief as possible.
Hi, my name is Lilian Jerimbothi from Kenya. And a question I'd like to ask the panelists, feel free for anyone to just come in. We're often hearing about creation of jobs or rather labor mobility again, including the marginalized communities, and that is vis-a-vis women and young people. But I'd like to understand from where you're sitting, from where you're coming from, how does that look like in practice, especially when it comes to co-creating and designing the solutions with the young people? Again, is it a matter of just having young people coming in, ticking this box, or are we practically and actively co-creating these solutions with them? And how does that look like from an accountability mechanism again, all the way to transforming the lives of actual young people again? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Very important question. How are we co-creating with young people? How are we co-creating with women? There's one more question here.
Merci. Bonjour, chers panélistes. Je suis Dr Gonyi Blédé-Paterne, enseignant-chercheur à l'Université Félix-Houphouët-Boigny, Cocody. On a beaucoup parlé de l'emploi et le principal problème qui est ressorti, c'est l'inadéquation de la formation et de l'emploi. Donc, ma question est en ce sens, c'est de savoir si on doit changer la manière de former les jeunes d'Afrique, qu'est-ce qui doit changer exactement? Comment rendre cette inadéquation-là en adéquation avec les besoins du secteur privé, alors que les besoins du secteur privé eux-mêmes sont très changeants et très rapidement. Au-delà de ça, les retombées de la modification des curricula aura des conséquences sur le long terme. Mais à court terme, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire de manière plus efficace et plus rapide pour que les retombées soient plus perceptibles immédiatement? C'est ça ma question.
Thank you very much for that question. Should we change the way we are training young people? And we have another question right at the back, and then we'll come to the front.
Okay, thank you so much. I have, let's say, about two questions. The first question has to do with qualifications. In each country, there are requirements for qualifying the credentials. And I think this is one of the major barriers that is being faced by young people as they are trying to be part of the labor migration, where one can get a job possibly in South Africa, as an example, and he is or she is from another country. The qualification process, which allows or which facilitates for that person to get a job in another country. That is one of the major barriers that young people face, particularly in the job market. So the question in regards to this is, what measures are in place to counter these barriers to ensure that the young person can freely move to another country, particularly here in Africa, for the job? The second one has to do with skills matching. Quite a number of youths are skilled, yes. But with the current trend, what industry is offering vis-a-vis the skills that are available? We are looking at a scenario, somebody was trained 5 years, 6 years ago, and what is happening now, the changes in the industry, AI coming on board. How can we also have this young man or this young woman embedded into the job market? Thank you, and back to you.
Take one more from the front.
Bonjour à tous, je suis Samuel Kwaku, expert en évaluation. J'ai deux questions. La première question, c'est à l'endroit du représentant de l'IOM. Alors, je voudrais savoir exactement quel est le profil des jeunes qui sont en mobilité entre l'Afrique et puis l'extérieur. Parce que lorsqu'on regarde un peu, disons, l'historique, sinon le récit de certains jeunes qui traversent la mer avec, par exemple, de très fortes sommes d'argent, on se demande, est-ce que c'est parce que ces jeunes-là sont dans des situations précaires qu'elles décident, n'est-ce pas, de traverser la mer? Par exemple, avec 1 million, 2 millions, 3 millions, ce sont, n'est-ce pas, des fortes sommes sur lesquelles qu'on peut utiliser pour investir, n'est-ce pas, au niveau de l'Afrique. Mais on retrouve cette forme-là sur des jeunes qui sont dans le désert, etc., même à l'extérieur. Donc, quel est réellement le profil des jeunes qui traversent? Et l'autre question, c'est en termes, n'est-ce pas, de mobilité. Je crois qu'il y a l'un des intervenants qui a parlé, n'est-ce pas, de passeport de mobilité. Alors, quel est réellement le type de mobilité? Est-ce que c'est une mobilité au niveau des formations? Est-ce que c'est de cela que les jeunes ont besoin? C'est plus la mobilité en termes d'emploi que les jeunes ont besoin. Et lorsqu'on regarde un peu ce type de mobilité, pour le moment, ce n'est pas assez facile pour un jeune de quitter un pays et de s'installer, n'est-ce pas, dans un autre pays. Moi, par exemple, j'ai eu à faire l'expérience de traverser les frontières terrestres de plusieurs pays, malgré le fait que j'ai tous mes papiers, le passeport, la carte de vaccination, mais j'ai dû quand même payer des frais assez quand même élevés pour juste traverser. Alors, lorsqu'on nous parle, n'est-ce pas, de passeport, de mobilité, de quoi on veut, n'est-ce pas, parler. Et puis également aussi, pour terminer, il y a certains pays, pour des besoins, je dirais, je ne sais pas, personnels, demandent à d'autres pays d'établir des visas entre ces deux pays. Alors, au moment où vous parlez, n'est-ce pas, de supprimer, n'est-ce pas, les visas entre les pays africains, il y a d'autres pays également aussi qui demandent à ce que des visas soient établis entre certains pays.
Thank you very much. We'll first take that set of questions because we also have some more questions online. So let me see how we can do this so that we are as efficient as possible. Tapera, who is online and who gave the keynote, I have a few questions for you to respond to. One of them is on the co-creation. How are we co-creating this with young people? But I also have a question online on whether Africa should forge its own models of education and training that prioritize intra-African strategies over global standards. Because the person asking feels by addressing its own needs in terms of training and market access, the continent could retain its talent and prevent it from emigrating to fill labor shortages in foreign countries. So I'll first come to you, Tapera, to answer that very briefly, and then I'll turn to my panelists here in the room. Tapera, are you with us online? It seems he's still not with us online. So let me turn to you, David, because there's a couple.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you, Director. Sorry about that technicality. So let me take the the two questions. So I'll start with the one about looking at young people as development actors and not just as passive beneficiaries of policies and investments. This is very important. In fact, when we introduced the youth skills and jobs marker system, the reason why we have the word youth there is because we strongly believe that young people are part of the solution. We also believe strongly that they are also quite capable of leading development. They are not future leaders; they are leaders today. And if you look at our annual meetings in 2025, we in fact brought in young people to co-create what the bank should do. They spoke to all our 81 shareholders for the first time in 60 years. So we provided a very high-level opportunity to engage young people to tell us of the Africa that they need, and to talk to the bank's shareholders in a very closed session, which we call the governance dialogue, at the annual meetings in 2025. So from the bank perspective, we strongly believe that young people are part of the solution. They are leaders today, not tomorrow, and they should be engaged in finding solutions for the continent. And we know that a number of regional member countries actually have started doing this. We have started to see young people even becoming presidents on the continent. So I think we are getting there, but a lot more work is required to allow and to give young people the space to participate as development actors and not just as passive beneficiaries. So thank you for that question. It's really very relevant because often people think that young people are leaders tomorrow, and so they should be treated as passive beneficiaries. But in any case, if we are democratic, our population is largely youth. So you cannot have a policy or a decision that does not involve the majority of the population in terms of deciding what should be done. So if we are to be democratic, then indeed young people should really take center stage in Africa in terms of deciding the future that they would like to participate in building. There was a question on training and employment mobility. I guess that's the question. Second question I'm supposed to answer. So the first part is when it comes to employment mobility, we also have to bear in mind that remote work opportunities have also become a very big source of employment. So in other words, we can equip young people to have the skills to access remote work opportunities. So you don't have to leave your country, but you can access employment opportunities in other markets if you are properly equipped with the skills and the technology that you require to participate in labor markets that are beyond your own geography. So there is a lot of remote work opportunities, not just on the continent, but also globally, that are coming up. And that's where investments in skills become very critical when it comes to accessing those opportunities. Finally, to the comment that should we revamp the education and skills system, indeed, we should train people within market systems. One of the challenges that we've had is we tended to invest so much in institutions that are just training people outside market systems. So what happens if you look at technical vocational training center that's training people outside market systems, their equipment is already derelict. It's overtaken by industry practice. Their curriculum is overtaken by industry practice from the moment it's established, because industry practice is moving. It's a moving goal. As markets shifts, industry moves. And therefore, training people outside market systems is one of the biggest challenges we've had you continue to produce graduates who are already overtaken by industry practice. So it's very important that we revamp the education and training system so that it responds to the opportunities on the continent. It brings down the value chain so that they are rooted on the continent. Because by exporting raw materials and commodities, we are also exporting the jobs. And so that's why it's important to refocus the education system in bringing down African value chains so that they are rooted back here at home. Thank you very much, Director. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Tapera, and really taking away that last point you have mentioned, training within the market systems, not outside of the market systems. So I'm going to come to the room. David, if you can answer some of the questions on the qualifications and certifications and how we ensure portability across borders. But also, what are these profiles that those seeking employment opportunities outside should have? I'm going to come to you, Andrew, to respond to the question on these evolving skills, that skills are evolving all the time. The skills we are training today, the jobs of the next 5 years might be completely different jobs. So how do we keep pace with that? And then Sakina, if you could answer, I have a question here from our online audience asking, given the shortage of skilled young peoples and the challenges we are having of capacity building, do you think Africa has a real chance of capitalizing on this demographic dividend? And what can we do at the national level to make sure that we capitalize on this demographic dividend? And then, Paul, I'll come back to you to also answer that same question, but in terms of what is it that can be done at the continental level to really make sure we capitalize on this demographic dividend. We are very short of time, so I know these are big questions, but I want to give you a minute each to respond. And if you have a final word to say, take the opportunity as well.
Thank you for the question. Je vais parler en français parce qu'apparemment mon anglais était décevant pour la traduction au fond, donc on m'a demandé de continuer en français. Alors pour la question des qualifications et la portabilité, je pense qu'il faut avancer sur deux axes. Le premier, c'est la standardisation. On a mentionné certains mécanismes continentaux qui viennent d'être assez récemment mis en place avec je suis désolé, je vais le dire en anglais, je ne connais pas en français directement, mais le Continental Qualification Framework de l'Union africaine qui offre un standard pour uniformiser au niveau national tous les cadres de référencement des qualifications. Comme ça, on peut les comparer, on peut les accepter plus facilement, très concrètement, d'État en État. Donc, ça, c'est une direction. Comment c'est pris en charge par les États? Encore une fois, il y a des cadres de classification des qualifications qui ne sont pas finalisés au niveau national dans beaucoup d'États africains. Ça n'aide pas à la reconnaissance mutuelle. Il y a la question aussi des accords bilatéraux de reconnaissance mutuelle des qualifications qui peuvent être faits sur des corridors, par exemple, où on sait qu'il y a des migrations régulières, où il y a beaucoup de passages, où il y a, pour la migration de travail, focaliser sur ces corridors pour faire des accords spécifiques. Et encore une fois, je vais remettre le secteur privé devant, parce que c'est eux qui dictent un peu les qualifications qui leur sont nécessaires pour répondre à leurs besoins de production, n'est-ce pas? Donc, avoir le secteur privé dans la discussion, faire valoir les qualifications des instituts de formation africains d'une manière générale, les faire certifier avec des certifications qui sont internationalement reconnues. Ça, c'est des mécanismes pratiques qui vont permettre une plus grande portabilité, un plus grand accès au marché du travail globalement en Afrique et ailleurs des travailleurs africains. Sur la question des profils migratoires, alors ça va certainement pas trop vous surprendre, on parle essentiellement, j'ai les statistiques des gens qu'on aide à revenir dans leur pays d'origine, hein, qui se retrouvent en difficulté dans des pays tiers, de transit ou de destination, et qu'on aide à rentrer. Ça me dérange un peu de faire le profil d'un migrant moyen parce que les situations sont très diverses. Et de faire une moyenne, ça aplatit la diversité des situations qu'on rencontre. Mais typiquement, la grande majorité des migrants qu'on aide à revenir, c'est des jeunes hommes de 18 à 35 ans qui ont peu de qualifications académiques, peu de bagages académiques. Sur eux. Après, là-dedans, il faut aussi faire une désagrégation de genre. Le ratio, c'est entre 60% hommes, 30% femmes. 75% des migrants qu'on aide à retourner répondent à la tranche d'âge que je vous ai rencontrée. Donc, il y a aussi toutes ces catégories de mineurs isolés et puis de personnes qui sont en dehors de l'âge de travail ou qui sont plus considérés comme jeunes en tout cas. Et la donnée qui est vraiment importante par rapport à la seconde partie de votre question, c'est le capital au départ. En fait, 88% des migrants qu'on aide à rentrer dans leur pays d'origine, au départ, ils étaient engagés dans une activité génératrice de revenus. Donc, on n'est pas dans la situation d'un jeune qui n'a rien à faire au pays et qui va quitter. C'est la condition de la qualité de l'emploi, de l'informalité, des revenus qui sont générés et de l'espoir aussi de pouvoir trouver, par le biais de la migration, une situation meilleure. Meilleur salaire, meilleures conditions de vie, etc. C'est ça qui conduit les gens à abandonner leur activité économique. Et comme vous l'avez justement remarqué, il y a des sommes importantes qui sont investies dans le voyage. Donc le capital, ce n'est pas celui du migrant lui-même, c'est celui d'une communauté ou d'une famille élargie qui est souvent mis à profit. Et là-dessus, on a évolué d'une communication basée sur les risques de la migration irrégulière vers une communication centrée sur les opportunités locales, en disant aux jeunes qui s'embarquent sur ces trajets, avec le même capital investi localement, vous pouvez générer des revenus, il y a des opportunités locales pour aller réorienter l'espoir des gens localement et pas nécessairement sur ces voyages qui sont dangereux, s'ils ne sont pas organisés par le biais de voies régulières de migration. Et je vois qu'on me regarde, donc je ne vais pas pouvoir toucher à tous les détails, mais voilà l'esprit.
Thank you very much. And a very important point on how we organize the capital for migrants. And I think that's something that we are thinking a lot here at the bank as well in terms of diaspora remittances and how to structure that diaspora remittances so that it's going into actual investments and job creation. Ms. Sakina, in 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think one of the important thing we have also to think of is, especially to our governments, is we need to do like it's a market intelligence to know what special skills do we need within the country, but also within the region, and then think within Africa in general and global, because we will keep on producing the products that will not be utilized or will not make any impact to the country economy. So Tanzania, as I have said earlier, when we were developing and making a reform on our education policy, we had also to do kind of course, a research, and we did evaluation on our education system to identify what are the really needs for within our country, because we don't want to produce only graduates that have skills, that we want to produce the products that have they can be employed anywhere within and outside the country. So the same has to be done to other countries within the region. We can also think of involving other countries' universities to to team up and come up with the program that can be accepted within the countries. This also will help mobility of our graduates going outside the country and being recognized to other countries, because most of like East Africa is very now you can see people are moving within East Africa and working to other countries within Africa because of having kind of mutual recognition. So we need to improve to other regions also to develop like mutual recognition framework where will allow youth to move within the region, but also global to and secure more opportunities for employment. Yeah, thank you.
Andrew, on how do we keep pace with how quickly jobs are evolving, skills needs are evolving? How do we ensure we are building skills not just for today, but for the jobs of tomorrow?
Thank you very much. We are gradually moving the conversations from skills, but now to skills and lifelong learning. Our World of Work report that was published last month focused on lifelong learnings, and part of the surveys, the national surveys, were actually done in Tanzania for Africa, and we've also published a research brief on skills and lifelong learning for Africa. And I encourage colleagues in the room to search these reports, especially the Africa regional. Lifelong learning is one of the approaches. Of course, also, it's important that we keep an eye on what some researchers or analysts call industries of the future or sectors of the future. We may not know exactly how things will play out, but we have some indication. And these sectors, for example, we've already seen the green sector, logistics in the context of trade, as sustainable agriculture in the context of climate change, green skills. So, a look or a full focus on these skills of the future, these sectors of the future is one way. Of course, the lifelong learning approach also means that skills development should be looked at from the broader context, a system-wide reform framework, rather than focusing on one. One of the important outcomes or findings of our report is that industry employers look for a bundle of skills. So they are not specifically. So more and more with digitalization, things have moving to cognitive skills, social skills, and skills that the future will have to look. Then, of course, lifelong learning and skills for the future will probably go beyond investments that the individual and probably the employer won't be able to undertake. So that means also skill systems, educational systems should also be part of this framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Such important points there. A skills framework that's based on lifelong learning, bundles of skills, as well as thinking about the skills and sectors of the future. Paul, just a last word from you in 1 minute.
Thank you very much, moderator and colleagues, panelists. I want to align my last word to the training methods in order to leverage Africa's demographic dividend. Skills training is critical. So for the continent to recognize mutual skills acquired, qualifications acquired elsewhere, and the benefits of population movement is very, very critical. Supporting exchange programs. Skills training need to look at promoting critical thinking, promoting inquiry, and starting early, starting from the level of kindergarten, borrowing from those countries like Germany or Japan that have actually strengthened skills and not necessarily recognizing high PhDs and etc., but skills and skills across the board. This is what we need for the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm told we have tons and tons of more questions online, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of time. One of the questions that came very early on in the session was how we are supporting formalization, especially of SMEs, in order that they can also create decent jobs. I did want to say we have at the bank a program called the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, and part of that program is supporting women entrepreneurs, including those that are doing cross-border trade, and supporting them to formalize, noting that this formalization goes beyond registration of businesses. It goes into how you actually get those SMEs to be part of both national, regional, and global value chains so that they can also access markets. I want you to join me in thanking our panelists and our speakers for this morning. Thank you so much for those very practical insights into what needs to happen. I know you were promised, I think you were promised a tea break at some around an hour ago, but because we started a little bit late, I want to ask for your indulgence that instead of going for a tea break, that we continue with the next session. And anytime if you want to grab some water, some tea, please feel free to walk out there and come back in so that we make sure that we can also keep our online audience online for the next session. So thank you very much for being part of the panel. Thank you very much for all those insights. I would like us to go right into the next session. This session is a practical session where we've been talking a lot about what should happen to youth, what should happen to women, and now we have a session where we actually invite some young people, invite some of those that at the forefront of this to really talk about what some of their experiences are. So it's a set of lightning talks, but before we go into that set of lightning talks, I would like to ask our tech team if we still have Naomi online so that we can give her about 5 minutes to finish the presentation that she was not able to finish earlier due to some connection problems. So checking Naomi, if you're online, please let me know. Are you online, Naomi? Naomi is not online. As soon as she's online, we will go to her presentation. So we have a set of what I call TED-type talks. Sharp, pointy, right-on message. 5 minutes with a few speakers. We have Mr. Ibrahima Diabate, who's the president of Conseil National des Jeunes de Côte d'Ivoire, CNJCI, who is joining us here in person. We have Ms. Lilian Njeri Mbuthi, who's a development strategist, that's also here with us in person. Mr. Ignatius Akpabio, who is the Chief Growth Officer of the Trade Depot, who's joining us online. And we have Ms. Mary Francis Malunga, who's the founder, Alliance of Female Cross-Border Traders Association in Southern Africa. And it is my honor now to invite Mr. Ibrahima Diabate, President of the Conseil National des Jeunes de Côte d'Ivoire. Mr. Ibrahima, the floor is yours.
Merci. Je voudrais d'entrée de jeu remercier donc la Banque africaine de développement et également IDEV pour cette invitation qui nous a été adressée au niveau du Conseil national des jeunes de Côte d'Ivoire. Étant donné que notre intervention se veut brève, précise et concise, je m'en vais mettre les pieds dans le plat. Les pieds dans le plat en précisant que nous allons tout d'abord nous appuyer sur une remarque bien particulière. C'est que l'Afrique est un continent aujourd'hui qui fait rêver, mais l'Afrique a une réalité. C'est que le dividende démographique le plus important de notre planète s'y trouve. Aujourd'hui, les moins de 25 ans, si l'on s'en tient donc aux dernières données de l'Agence nationale de statistique de Côte d'Ivoire, les moins de 25 ans font près de 60% donc de nos populations. C'est dire qu'aujourd'hui, il faut que les États et les gouvernements au niveau de l'Afrique se mobilisent soit à apporter des réponses concrètes visant l'inclusion économique de cette frange de la population qui est importante, ou bien cette frange-là deviendra, dans le cas où ces gouvernements ne prennent pas des décisions assez pratiques, ces jeunes-là deviendront comme une fragilité pour nos États. L'histoire a montré qu'en Afrique, à chaque fois que des jeunes sont informés, formés, orientés, accompagnés, et également ont les compétences nécessaires, ils créent de la valeur. L'exemple qui me vient à l'esprit pendant que j'ai le micro, c'est celui de Yaya Kone qui a été lauréat ici, donc en 2015 de la semaine de l'innovation technologique portée par la BAD, un jeune Ivoirien qui emploie aujourd'hui près de 500 personnes avec près de 70% donc, de femmes, parlant donc d'emploi direct et indirect. C'est dit qu'aujourd'hui, les jeunes ne manquent pas de talent, ils ne manquent pas donc d'ambition, mais ils manquent parfois, comme cela a été dit tout à l'heure, de compétences adaptées au marché de l'emploi. Il manque parfois de passerelles vers des formations professionnelles, des passerelles vers le financement, mais également des passerelles pour pouvoir exporter leurs compétences à l'échelle régionale. Nul besoin donc de relever une fois de plus les différentes barrières qui ont été notées tout à l'heure à l'occasion du panel précédent relatif donc aux limites qui sont constatées dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre donc, des accords portés par les pays africains. Aujourd'hui, la ZLECAf qui appelle de tous ses voeux une intégration continentale, une intégration régionale, qui appelle de tous ses voeux que les jeunes Africains puissent circuler librement, doivent prendre donc le taureau par les cornes selon nous et suivre donc dans la mesure donc du possible tous ces engagements qui ont été pris. Ceci dit, je m'en vais me limiter donc aux propositions qui concernent donc les jeunes, faire en sorte que les jeunes puissent tirer véritablement profit du dividende démographique pour nous, c'est faire en sorte qu'ils aient accès aux formations, des formations qui répondent au marché de l'emploi, des formations qui leur soient bénéfiques, faire en sorte que les universités et les grandes écoles ne forment pas des chômeurs. Avec aujourd'hui l'évolution de l'intelligence artificielle, avec cette émergence des nouvelles technologies, faire en sorte que le numérique puisse en tout cas être à disposition, à portée de ces jeunes-là. La réduction de la fracture numérique doit être une réalité également. L'accès au financement et, comme nous l'avons dit tout à l'heure, permettre aux jeunes de pouvoir circuler librement, de pouvoir entreprendre et permettre aux jeunes qui se trouvent à Lagos de se dire qu'en venant à Abidjan, il se trouvera chez lui et qui pourra donc bénéficier de tout ce qui est avantage donc en termes de fiscalité, en termes donc d'environnement économique, afin qu'il puisse en tout cas créer de la valeur. C'est en résumé l'intervention qui nous a été donnée donc de présenter. Je vous dis merci.
Thank you very much, Ibrahima Diabate. Our next speaker is Ms. Lilian Njeri Mbuthi, who's a development strategist and who has also joined us in person.
Let me try the little French I know. Bonjour. But I will learn French after this. My name is Lilian Njeri Mbuthi from and based in Nairobi, Kenya. And today I'll be taking you through a few reflections based on why regional integration is very important, and also the need for us to constantly have marginalized communities at the heart of our solutions. We often talk about regional integration in very big terms, right? A market of 1.4 billion people, a $3 trillion revenue or even economy, and thousands of agreements and frameworks across the continent, which are very ambitious, right? But I think the most important question is, when do regional integration actually improve and transform the lives of its people? We have roads, we have power lines, we have trade agreements, we have the FCFTA, we have so much that continue to look cute on paper, to look cute in policies, and so on, even at the African Union level. But when you're looking at evidence, be it from the transport corridors, be it from the trade agreements, the regional power tools, and trade facilitation initiatives across Africa, one pattern continues to stand out for me. And too often, we are building connectivity without creating transformation. We've seen what is possible, along with so many frameworks, again, that have been cut by almost half, and trade costs that have fallen significantly. These gains do not automatically reach everyone. We've seen women entrepreneurs, young people, small businesses continue to face barriers that prevent them from fully benefiting from the regional markets. Regulations are not always aligned. Border processes remain cumbersome, and opportunities are often unevenly distributed. So the challenge is not a lack of ambition. If anything, actually, not only just the young people, but African people or people of the African continent are among the most hardworking people. The challenge is making sure that people can actually benefit from that ambition, from their hard work, from their ideas, from their interventions, from their solutions. And the evidence continues to show that regional integration delivers when three things come together: moving beyond the strong regional institutions, domestic policies that actually align with regional commitments, and sustainable financing. And this is where I want us to sit with this conversation a little bit. When you're talking about sustainable financing and the need for us to constantly resource the actual people, the actual solutions, how does that look like at an institutional level, at a society level, at a community level, and even at a social responsibility level. When these three things come together, integration becomes more than a policy agenda. It becomes jobs, affordable housing, affordable electricity. It becomes stronger businesses, and it creates opportunities for everyone. So if there's one practical action I will leave with us today, is that we stop measuring success only by the number of frameworks put in place, policies being tabled, motions being tabled in parliaments, and so on. Let us ask a much more important question. Who is actually benefiting? The success of regional integration is not only measured in kilometers of roads or megawatts of electricity, or funding disbursed across initiatives. Whether it's a farmer somewhere in Kenya, somewhere in Senegal, can trade across borders, can move freely. Remember the conversations about intra-Africa travel? We're still having that conversation. We're still requiring a note verbale for us to come to Abidjan, and we are Africans. We still have our visa, a sticker visa for Egypt, Nigeria, and we are Africans. How? We shouldn't be having such conversations, you know? And whether young people across the continent can be able not only to build dignified livelihoods and hopeful futures. Africa does not need connectivity for connectivity's sake. It needs regional integration that delivers for, by, and with its people. Integration only matters if people can be able to feel its impact in our everyday lives. How many young people in the room? Let me see Gen Zs. Anyone born in the 1997? 98? Millennials in the room? I'd pause there just to speak to fellow young people. I'm a Gen Z, I'm born 98, and we are often asking for a seat at the table, but most of us lack the actual content for us to sit at that same table. We have to move beyond that cliche of young people must be in the room, young people must be in the room. What are you young people bringing in the room? So you have to do your homework. You have to see what's needed, what role you can play beyond asking for a seat at the table. If today you were to sit with the Minister of Trade, for example, or the Director of Trade at ILO or AfDB, what would you tell them? Food for thought. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Lillian, for that challenge. How do we measure regional integration? We have to measure it by the number of lives changed, and then the challenge to young people. It's important to be at the table. Think about what you bring to the table. Now we have two last interventions, Mr. Ignatius Akpabio, who's the Chief Growth Officer, Trade Depot. Ignatius, you're online?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Excellent. Please go ahead.
Okay, afternoon, everyone, and building on Lillian's submission, because a lot of the integration within Africa builds on quite a number of the things that she spoke about. But I'll be speaking more towards, obviously, the opportunities for business, entrepreneurship, and cross-border trade. And this is both my personal, I'll be speaking both my personal experiences here and there, and also try and compare where we are in Africa with where Europe has gotten to, which is a bit further down from where we are, right? For me, integration is about infrastructure growth, and into being able to integrate infrastructure across the region is probably what would be the single most important aspect of trying to build the regional integration, right? We have automatically become strangers to our own neighbors, right? Cameroon, Douala, for example, is an hour, 30 minutes if I had an helicopter from my village in Akwa Ibom to Douala, right? But it takes almost an entire day to get to Douala from Lagos, for example. You have to take 2 flights in between. That's not that's not integration, because when you look at, for example, in Germany, if you are going from Cologne to Lagos to London, right, you could take a 1-hour flight into London and come back the same day, right? Now, when you look at the ease of doing business in that, you look at how does an entrepreneur manage his business and go and look for external businesses or go and look for export opportunities across the region, right? And still be able to come back to dinner with his family, right? So integration is a lot about how do we encourage cross-border trade by building shared skies, shared roads, rails, and the rails of payments, which is obviously finance, which Lillian spoke about already. It was interesting to note that in the 1990s, African airlines shared 60% of the total market share for aviation in Africa. Today, it's less than 20%, right? Between Nigeria, Lagos, and Abidjan, right, there are effectively 4 borders across that channel, right? 4 official borders and about 18 unofficial borders. All of this with its own varying levels of taxation, and all of this having a final impact on the cost of the products moving across the region. Simple example was trying to move goods from Lagos to Ghana or Accra, for example, right? It takes you about 2 weeks to complete that process. It takes you about 3 weeks to ship from China to Lagos. China is all the way in Asia, and Ghana or Accra is just right next door, a 10-hour trip by road, right? So obviously we figured out how to delete the tariffs and do the ratifications from the AfCFTA and all of that, right? But we haven't figured out how to keep the friction away, which is in comparison to Europe, for example, shared skies. In 1997, Europe ratified across the European Union that foreign airlines could fly into neighboring countries without taxes and tariffs. That significantly dropped the cost of migration, right, which obviously improves the cost of doing business for an entrepreneur or business. In Africa, we signed a single air trade agreement sometime in 2018, right? But the infrastructure to support that hasn't followed. Similarly, the European market has a single market. Internal trade rose to 60% by about 60% of GDP, and all of that. In Africa, we have signed the treaty, right? But we only trade about 15% of total trade within ourselves within Africa, right? So about 85% of the trade that happens in Africa happens between ourselves and our foreign partners. Simple example like the Schengen in Europe, right? The Schengen has 27 countries on it. A single point of entry from outside of the Schengen region and easy access within the Schengen region, that's 27 countries. In Africa, we have about 57 countries that have signed the AfCFTA, which is supposed to support free movement of goods and people, right? But we still have these barriers in between. In terms of currency, I know we've all preached and we all want a single currency in Africa, right? Europe also wanted that, right? But in sometime back, they signed the SEPA, right? And that allowed cross-border payments, which is very similar to our PAPs in Africa, which obviously kudos to the Afrexim Bank and obviously the FCTA in putting the PAPs, the payments together, the cross-border payments together, right? So we have very similar issues, and we could learn from similar mistakes that have happened with more developed nations or more developed countries, right? And we are already building some of this infrastructure to support trade, right? We're not just moving fast enough, right? And we can easily skip the mistakes and just move to the solutions. Obviously, in terms of infrastructure, some of the things that we have seen that have worked or that are in the works, but maybe not moving as fast enough. The African Union single air market, right, already signed, it needs to be implemented. We're not reinventing the wheel. It's been done before, so we know exactly what needs to be done in terms of tariffs and and taxes on the airlines and how that affects tariffs and all of that for passengers or airline fees. On the roads, we have the Abidjan to Lagos corridor, which is already in progress, right? Has been signed. It can move faster so that we can move across that corridor a lot faster. A single unified asset that joins us together, one road, one set of rules, one outcome shared by 5 countries on that corridor. That's the model, and that's the only model that scores. Kudos to some of the operators that are already building infrastructure that helps to sustain the continent and helps to integrate the continent further. I'm a proud Akwa Ibom man from Nigeria, right? More recently, the local, the sub-national government there put together an MRO, a maintenance, repair, and overhaul facility, right, to help aircraft maintenance, right, so that regionally we don't have to take planes outside of the region to go fix them. We could fix them within the region, right? Obviously, reducing the cost of operations for the airlines. Like I said earlier, we already have PAPs. I think we already have a lot of local production going on within the region, right? We just need to be able to exchange those capabilities across the sub-region. So the models work. We're simply not scaling them fast enough. What do we need? We need to build up government infrastructure as shared assets, obviously. Fund our skies, roads, rails, and the payment rails as a single cross-border asset. The way that corridor treaty already does, the scale is what we're already working on or what needs to be done. And more importantly, I think every speaker has mentioned it here, we need to measure what matters. We need to stop measuring number of ratifications done, number of treaties signed, number of conventions that have been enacted, and really judge integration by connectivity. How fast do goods and people move across the corridor? How easy is it for businesses to trade within one another? How easy it is for an entrepreneur to fly into a remote area in East Africa, right, conduct his business and be able to export products from West Africa to East Africa very easily, like one would be able to do in Europe. We need to build it as one asset, and what lifts one of us, more importantly, lifts all of us. What benefits one must benefit all. So I think that is the single message for me to the panel today and to everyone listening, operators alike, that what benefits one must benefit all. And when we are building or putting together policies and treaties, and we also need to think about how we're going to fund the implementation of those treaties, how we're going to foster integration amongst operators and governments alike, and how we're going to make Africa a better place for every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ignatius. And now we have our last but not least speaker, Ms. Mary Frances Malunga, who's the founder, Alliance of Female Cross-Border Traders Associations in Southern Africa, AfDBE. Over to you, Mary Frances. Can you hear me? Can I just check with our tech team that Mary Frances is online? I'm told Mary Frances is not online. We did have a confirmation that she would be joining us, so we will follow up, and if there is any recording, all points that she will send, we can share that with you. We have come to the end of this session. When we started the session, I reflected on 3 questions that was going to guide our discussion today. The first one was, what does the evidence tell us about which combinations of interventions actually create jobs, productivity, a skill, especially for young people and women. And we've heard a lot today about skills development, aligning skills development with the needs of the market, aligning skills development with the current sectors that are driving transformation at the continent, but also with future sectors. Ensuring that skills is a long life experience and framework so that we can make sure that the skills of young people are actually aligned with what the continent needs. We've heard about co-creation of jobs and opportunities with young people and women. We've heard about infrastructure that connects the continent, whether it's through economic corridors. We've heard about the regional protocols that we have, including the free movement of people and goods. We've heard about AfCFTA and other regional integration models that are working today. We have heard about skills mobility and the certifications that are needed and that would work to ensure that there's more efficient skills mobility across the continent. The second question we were reflecting on today is, where are we still falling short? Whether this is in labor mobility, skills recognition, access to finance, gender equality. We have heard of the gender gaps that exist with more young women not transitioning from school to work because of different barriers. We've heard about the informality that we see within our employment sectors, but also businesses. We've heard of the issues around translating those regional protocols into actual practical movement of people and goods, that sometimes what is in the protocol is not always what the experience is at the border. Our last speaker talked about 4 border points, formal ones, 18 informal ones, and goods taking up to 3 weeks to travel a distance that should ordinarily be a 10-hour distance because of those barriers. So we know there are gaps, we know there are places where we are falling short and where we need to do more work. But we've also heard about data. How are we measuring our success? Are we just measuring our success based on how many protocols have been signed, on how many ratifications have been made? How do we ensure that all this is actually translating into improvements in the lives of people, into increased trade, into increased connections, into increased ease of doing business? How do we ensure that access to finance is reaching those that need it most? And the third question we were reflecting on is, what must change to ensure that young people, women, SMEs, and informal workers are not just participants, but real drivers and architects of the change we seek? We heard about co-creation. We heard about better mobility, a skills exchange passport for the continent. We heard about better data that allows us to know what is working and what is not working. So it's been a very enriching morning. I hope it has been for you as well, and that at least you have learned or heard something that you didn't know before you came into the room this morning. Personally, I was surprised to see the data on migration and where our African people are migrating to, that a lot of them still continue to be in the continent, despite all those challenges that we talk about on a day-to-day basis. So I do hope that this has been productive for all of you. It has been a pleasure moderating the conversation. I do have one quick announcement to make. First is I am told that for online participants, you will see a post-session survey when you exit Zoom. Please take a few minutes to complete it because your feedback will help the team at the bank improve on future events. And for participants in the room, as soon as I'm done, there'll be a QR code for the post-session survey that will be displayed. Please fill that in. Last but not least, I want to thank all our speakers. I want to thank Tapera Muzira for that very stimulating, informative keynote presentation. I want to thank Paul Mpuga, our division manager for macroeconomic policy, debt and sustainability, for the case study. I would like to thank Naomi Shifero and really apologize that due to technology issues, we were not able to listen to the full presentation, but that we can share it with participants. I want to thank our panelists, Andrew Aliu of ILO, Sakina Munyimku of the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, David Niels of IOM, as well as our lightning talk speakers, Mr. Ibrahima Diabate, Ms. Lilian Jerimbuthi, and Mr. Ignatius Akpabio, and hoping we will be able to share any insights that we get from Mary Frances Malunga once we get in touch with her. And to all of you, those of you in the room and those of you that have been online for being part of this session. The next session will start promptly at 2 p.m. So enjoy your lunch, everyone.